Hey, shalom, shalom, shalom lakam, which is peace unto you all. Hayawam tawab la adam za achyakam yawaman rachagador Charlotte, which is good day. This is your brother Yawan from the GMS camp and Charlotte na chamatam kayah malakatashamayim kwara. Repent ye, for the kingdom of heaven is in hand. Call layim la abanawa Yahweh bahasham Yahweh shai bahasham ruchahakodash. Wamashana la zakwanim nawa. Wamalakim Sharuchakadal, which is all praises to our Father Yahweh, which means he exists. Bahasham, the name Yahweh Shai delivers. And double honors to the elders and apostles of Great Millstone. This is an article on ethnologue.com, and it says, how many languages are there in the world? It says 7,159 languages are in use today. It says that number is constantly in flux because we're learning more about the world's languages every day. So which, eat the meat, spit out the bones, but it's more than 7,000 languages, in use today. But it says, and beyond that, the languages themselves are in flux. They're living and dynamic, used by communities whose lives are shaped by our rapidly changing world, in which, languages are alive and it's constantly changing. But the only language that does not change is the Hebrew. All right. And it's the most alive language. All right. So, continuing on, it says, they are living and dynamic and used by communities whose lives are shaped by our rapidly changing world. This is a fragile time. Roughly 44% of all languages are now in danger, often with fewer than 1,000 users remaining. Meanwhile, the world's 20 largest languages are the native tongue of more than 3.7 billion people. More than 3.7 billion people total. That's just 0.3% of the world's languages, accounting for nearly half of the world's population. And we understand that the lingua franca, which lingua franca goes into, the common language that's spoken will be it will be English. All right. But I want to get a quick point though. It says they're living and dynamic, used by communities whose lives are shaped by our rapidly changing world. Hold on. It says pretty much the point that it's alive and it's constantly pretty much languages currently change. All right, and it said that essentially right here it says living and dynamic, which these languages are alive, but you have some that are more living than others, which Hebrew is the most alive language. All right, and I just want to get that point. Let's get Bonsarat chapter 1, and we'll get verse 1. And it says, skipping straight to the point, and it says, wherefore let me entreat you to read it with favor and attention, and to pardon us wherein we may seem to come short of some words which we have labored to interpret. You see, because ultimately it's a task in transliteration and transcription and also transcribing. You see, because ultimately things have to be kept in their own language, because when you go from language to language, different parts of the tongue is used for different languages. Some languages will use more so at the back of the tongue. Some languages use more so at the front of the tongue. That's why pretty much they would pretty much translate things or translate different books and things of that nature. They would translate it for people to say it easier, all right, in their own tongue, But we understand that things are better to be spoken in Hebrew. But it says let me see where we at. It says, wherefore let me entreat you to read it with favor and attention, and to pardon us wherein we may seem to come short of some words which we have labored to interpret. For the same things uttered in Hebrew and translated into another tongue have not the same force in them. And not only these things, but the law itself and the prophets and the rest of the books have no small difference when they are spoken in their own language. So they pretty much made a point that languages are living, which, in a small sense they are, but the most alive language would be the Hebrew. It's the most alive and it's the most vigorous. And when something shows that it has vigor and vitality, it shows that it has strength, because vigor and vitality are characteristics of a male, and a male is known for their strength, So just how the Lord essentially set up, man over the woman, and et cetera, going into the order, the language is essentially made up in the same fashion, which again, the Hebrew would be the most alive, all right, in comparison to with the rest of the languages. But all of these languages are pretty much derivatives of Hebrew, So I want to get some precepts. What pretty much what sparked this lesson was, I was blessed to go and through the spirit. I went to the museum. It was a museum of alphabets. All right, in which they had that all languages. Interesting fun fact that pretty much the tour guide, or the lady that pretty much worked in there, had told me was that in order to make different languages, scholars, or so-called scholars, always have to go back to the scriptures to be able to borrow words from the Bible. All right, showing that each language has a root to the scriptures. Each language has a Shemitic or Shamitic root. All right, so I'm gonna get that point real fast. This is Genesis chapter 11, and we'll get the first verse. And it says, universal language, Babal, confusion, in which it says universal language because at one point everybody was speaking the same language. And it says, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there, in which the land of Shinar was in what they would call the so-called Middle East. If I'm not mistaken, it was around Babylonia. All right. But it says, and it came to pass as they journeyed from the east that they found a plain in the land of Shinar and dwelt there. I'm curious what it says right here. That would be Shanair. All right, and it says country of two rivers. So pretty much it had two rivers cutting through that area. And it says the ancient name for the territory, later known as Babylonia or Chaldea. So yeah, it was in the area of Babylonia and Chaldea. But it says and they said one to another, go to, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. And they said, go to, let us build us a city and a tower whose top may reach unto heaven. And let us make us a name, lest we be scattered abroad upon the face of all the earth. Oh, excuse me, the face of the whole earth. And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of men builded. And the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. And which, I'm going to get this quick precept real fast. This is Bonserot chapter 17. Bonserot chapter 17, verse 5. It says, they received the use of the five operations of the Lord, which Esau would call these the senses, but they really go back to the five operations of the Lord. You got the sight, you got the touch, you got smelling, you got hearing. All right, and you got I always forget the fifth one. Pretty much it goes into what they call the so-called senses. But it says, in the sixth place, he imparted them understanding, specifically the righteous lineage. It says in the seventh, speech and interpreter of the cogitations thereof. So cogitations goes back to the thoughts. All right, and how you can interpret something is essentially what they mean. All right, so essentially detailing what the different thoughts mean, they was able to communicate with each other. So going back, because again, the whole earth was of one language and of one speech. So going to verse 6, it says, and the Lord said, behold, the people is one, and they have all one language. So they all understood each other. They all could communicate well together. It says, in this they begin to do, and now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. Go to, let us go down, and there confound the languages, that they may not understand one another's speech. So ultimately the Lord, Yahweh, dispatched the Alahayim, the powers, the judges, ultimately to go down and confound the languages. All right, and that's essentially where the languages started to have derivatives from Hebrew. All right, it was Noah had three sons, going back to Genesis 10. All right, and verse 1, because during this time, all right, this happened during the time of Peleg, which his name goes into division. But this right here says Genesis 10 and 1. It says, now these are the generations of the sons of Noah, Sham, Ham, Yapath, and unto them were sons born after the flood. So each of these three pretty much repopulated the earth. All right, and from them, all right, they spoke Hebrew. All right, but their descendants essentially spoke derivatives of Hebrew, and this is where we start to see the different languages start to trickle down and create different branches. All right, so going back to Genesis, or actually let me get this, Genesis 10 and verse 25, and it says, and unto Ibar were born two sons. The name of one was Palag, for in his days was the earth divided, and his brother's name was Yaquatan. All right, so Peleg means division. Let's get this in the NLT. All right, and it says NLT, and it says Eber had two sons. The first name was Palag, which means division. For during his lifetime, the people of the world were divided into different language groups. His brother's name was Yaquatan. All right, which I believe that goes into small. So going back to Genesis 11, so going back to Genesis 11, we're at verse 7. And it says, "Go to, let us go down and there confound their language, that they may not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from thence upon the face of all the earth, and they left off to build the city. Therefore the name of it is called Babal, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth. And from thence did the Lord scatter them abroad upon the face of all the earth." So again, that's essentially where the languages was confounded, and that's where we started to see the different derivatives of the Hebrew. All right, but it didn't stop there. Esau used it as a means to deceive as well. As time started to progress, and I just got an example of that in this book that I got from that museum, but it's called the Alphabet Makers. And pretty much what Esau would do was he would go into different areas where different points in history. I'm gonna read this quick excerpt real fast, but let me see. It says, let me see. Slop. Well, I'll read this real fast. It says, when the Jews returned from Babylonian exile, they had become accustomed to Aramaic speech and alphabet, but more specifically, they had become accustomed to Aramaic, or what's also known as the Syriac, Chaldean. All right, we got accustomed to how they had wrote how they had wrote how they wrote the characters. All right, in which this was more specifically the Babylonian captivity. So in this captivity, we essentially took on the ways, or we had to essentially get used to how the Babylonians was running things. And one thing that they changed was the characters. And just to get an example of that, all right, this is why books like this, like Esdras or Ezra, Ezra and Esdras are the same. Esdras is just the gray size way of saying Ezra, or Isaiah. But this is Ezra chapter 4 and verse. I'm gonna start at verse 7. All right, and we notice that right here when we click on this, these say H. All right, in the language right here it says Hebrew. All right, but when we go to verse 8, all right, it switches right here. Right here it says A. All right, which these do derive from Hebrew, but these are written in the Aramaic, you see, because Jake was in these different captivities, so it was written and what they call the Syriac, the Aramaic, all right, the Syrian, the Chaldean, so I got another example in which this goes like this from Ezra 4 and 8 to Ezra 6 and 18. So continuing on, we'll get right here, this excerpt. It says, Cree sounds were too different from English. Eventually, Evans invented his own symbols. So and with the how them creating different symbols, that changes the psyche on how people would essentially think about these different symbols. And a lot of different times, to where we was in captivity, they would change, like vowels and stuff like that. Certain vowels or certain sounds we not supposed to know how to make, like whether it be a E or O or U. It's no E's, O's, or U's in the Paleo Hebrew. All right. So then another one, it says, I know that language is part of the Most High's eternal design, this is a quote. All right, these are excerpts in this book. It says, and I believe that alphabets are part of the pattern. Reading it again, it says, I know that language is part of the Most High's eternal design, and I believe alphabets are part of the pattern. So they essentially go back to the blueprint in creation. All right, the Lord Yahweh, gave the Lord Yahweh Shai the blueprint. Essentially, the Lord Yahweh Shai created everything. The Lord Yahweh Shai created the alphabet. He created everything. Because he was the first creation. All right, but again, going back to how the alphabet, the first original alphabet, Ha Alap Bayat. All right, in the Paleo Hebrew. All right, Ha is the, Alap goes into a cattle. All right, Bayat goes into a house. All right, in which they have various meanings and various applications, but that's essentially where they get the word for alphabet from. So yeah, I just want to go into where all languages essentially derive from, because everything has a biblical derivative. It derives from the scriptures, and I found that pretty profound point, that she mentioned, that pretty much when languages are translated, they always got to go back to the scriptures, so it's no way around them saying, oh, well, this was the first language or that was the first language when, essentially when they're making different languages, they always have to go back and get a biblical perspective to create different words. That's why we have different words like Uber, DoorDash. All right, they have a biblical derivation, so just wanted to go into that. Again, the first language was Hebrew, and that's what we're going to go back to in the kingdom. So Adawan Tazaza Bana Apollo, so there was a beautiful edification through the spirit. Wa Adawan Taza Atam Yashka Wam Ta Wablu as well. You have a good day. Wa Shalom Lakam, which is peace into you all. Shalom, shalom.